We've actually reached Homeward, the final chapter. A chill sweat broke out over Mafatu's body. He crouched there listening, unable for the moment to make a single movement. The rhythmic message that boomed across the mountain brought him a message of doom. Thump, 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 thump. It shivered along his nerves, setting his hair on edge. Warily, moving with utmost caution, Mafatu crept out of the house. The beach was softly brilliant in the light of the moon. Any figure moving along the sand he could see instantly. He stopped, every nerve strung like a wire. The beach was deserted, the jungle silent and black with mystery. The boy rose to his feet. Swift as a shadow, he turned into the undergrowth, where the trail led to the high plateau. The jungle had never seemed so dark, so ominous. The tormented roots of the mape trees clutched at him. Lineage tripped him. Tree ferns, ghostly in the half-light, rustled about him as he passed. Their muted hush seemed to say, "Not yet, Mafatu, not yet." By the time he reached the plateau, he was breathless and panting. He dropped to his knees and crawled forward, an inch or two at a time. One false move might spell destruction, but he had to know. He just had to know. Thump, 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 thump. The measured booming grew louder with every inch that he advanced. Now it pounded in his ears, reverberated throughout his body, thumbed his nerves. Somewhere below in darkness, hands drew forth from hollowed logs a rhythm that was a summation of life, a testament of death. Uri crept closer to his master's side, the hair ridging on his neck, his growl drowned in the thunder of the drums. Now the boy could see into the cleared circle of the sacred place. Leaping fires lighted a scene that burned itself forever into his memory. Fires blazed against the basalt cliffs, spurts of flame leaped and danced, showers of sparks borne off on the back of the night wind. A deep wild chanting rose above the drums. From his vantage point, Mafatu saw 6 war canoes drawn up on the beach. Mighty canoes they were, with high curving stems and decorations of white shell that caught the firelight in savage patterns. But what held the boy's eyes in awful trance were the figures, springing and leaping about the flames, figures darting, shifting, bounding towards the sky, the eaters of men. Firelight glistened on their oiled bodies, on flashing spears and bristling decorations. High above the drum's tattoo rose the mournful note of the conch shells, an eerie wailing like the voice of souls lost in interstellar space. Mafatu saw that the savages were armed with ironwood war clubs, clubs studded with shark's teeth or barbed with the stingray's spike. Zigzags of paint streaked their bodies, and towering above all, the great stone idol looked down with sightless eyes, just as it looked down for untold centuries. Mafatu, lying there on the ledge of basalt, watched the strange scene, powerless to move, and he felt doom itself breathing chill upon his neck. He drew back from the edge. He must flee. In that very instant, he heard a crashing in the undergrowth, not 20 yards away. A guttural shout ripped the darkness. The boy flung a desperate glance over his shoulder. 4 dark figures were tearing towards him through the jungle. He could see them now. He turned and ran blindly down the trail where he had come, slipping, stumbling, his breath all but choking in his throat. He felt like a man drowning in ice-cold water. He felt as if he had felt in his dreams, fleeing on legs that were weighted. Only one thought gave him courage as he ran. His canoe was ready and waiting. His canoe. If he could reach it, shove it into the water before the savages overtook him, then he would be safe. He knew this trail as he knew the back of his hand. The knowledge gave him the advantage. He could hear his pursuers slipping and stumbling through the brush, shouting threats in a language strange to his ears. but there was no mistaking the meaning of their words. As the boy dashed, fleet as an animal, thorns and vines clutched at him. Once he tripped and sprawled, but he was up and away in an instant. Through the trees he caught a glimpse of the white beach, and his throat surged. Then he was speeding across the sand, Uri right at his heels. The canoe was at the lagoon's edge. The boy fell upon the thwart, shoved the craft into the water. The logs under the stem rolled easily. In that second, the men, yelling wildly, broke from the jungle and dashed across the beach. Not a minute too soon, Mafatu leaped aboard and ran up the sail. The savages rushed after him into the shallows. A gust of wind filled the sail. It drew smartly. Now the men were swimming after him. One of them, in the lead, reached to lay a hand on the rigger. His hand clutched the pole. The canoe slacked. Mafatu could see the gleam of bare teeth. The boy lifted the paddle and cracked it down. With a groan, the man dropped back into the water. The canoe, freed, skimmed out towards the reef. The savages stopped, turned back towards the shore. Then they were running back to the trail across the island, shouting to their fellows as they ran. Mafatu knew it was only a question of minutes until the whole pack would be aroused and in pursuit. But he had the advantage of a head start and a light craft, while their canoes would have to beat around the southern point of the island before they could catch up with him. If only the breeze held. Mafatu remembered then that the canoes he had drawn up on the beach had not had sails. But there were strong arms to propel those canoes, to overtake him if they could. Mafatu's canoe, so slim and light, sped like a zephyr across the lagoon. The tide was on ebb, churning its pace through the passage into the outer ocean. The boy gripped the steering paddle and offered up a prayer. Then he was caught in the riptide. The outrigger dashed through the passage, a chip on the torrent. The wind of the open ocean rushed to greet it. The sail filled. The outrigger heeled over. Mafatu scrambled windward to lend his weight for ballast. He was off. Homeward, homeward. Soon, rising above the thunder, the boy could hear a measured sound of savage chanting. They were after him. Looking back over his shoulder, he could see the dark shapes of the canoe rounding the southern headland. Moonlight shone on 100 wet paddles as they dipped and rose to the rhythm of the chant. It was too dark to see the Eaters of Men themselves, but their wild song grew ever more savage as they got closer. The breeze was almost dead aft. The crab-claw sails swelled smooth and taut, rigid as a block of silver against the sky. The little canoe, so artfully built, ran with the swell and the favoring wind, laying knots behind her. She was as fleet and graceful as the gulls, but the Eaters of Men were strong paddlers with death in their hearts. Their moto taboo had been profaned by a stranger. Vengeance powered their muscles. They were tireless. On they came. And then the wind dropped. Imperceptibly at first. Sensing it, Mafatu whispered desperately for Maui. "Maui, do not desert me," he prayed. "This last time, please lend me your help." Soon the black canoes were so close that the boy could see the shine of their bodies, the glint of teeth, the flash of the ornaments on them. If the wind died, he was lost. Closer, closer the canoes advanced. Some of the warriors leaped to their feet, brandishing their clubs, shouting at the boy across the water. They were a sight to shake the stoutest heart. With every second they were cutting down the distance which separated their canoes from Mafatu. But then the wind freshened. Just a puff, but enough. Under its impetus, the little canoe skimmed ahead, while the boy's heart gave an upward surge of thanks. Maui had heard his prayer and answered. Day broke over the wide Pacific. There were 6 black canoes, paddle flashing, now gaining, now losing. The boy was employing every art and wile of sailing that he knew. As long as the wind held, he was safe. He managed his little craft to perfection, drawing from it every grace of speed in flight. He knew with the coming night the wind might drop, and then he forced that thought from his mind. If the wind deserted him, it would mean that Maui had deserted him. But the savages would never get him. It would be Moana, the sea god's turn. The boy looked down at the blue depths, and his smile was grim. But not yet, Moana. You haven't won. Not yet. But with failing night, the wind still held. Darkness rose up from the sea, enveloping the world. The stars came out, clear and bright. The boy searched among them for a familiar constellation. Should it be Mataiki, Little Eyes? Would Mataiki lead him safe to Hikaru? And then he saw and knew there, bravely, were the 3 stars of the fishhook of Maui. Maui, his sign. Those were his stars to steer by. They would lead him home. In that moment he was aware that the chanting of his pursuers was becoming fainter and fainter. At first he could not believe it. He listened intently. Yes, there was no doubt about it. As the breeze freshened, the sound grew fainter each moment. The boy quenched his thirst, ate a scrap of poi, fought against sleep as the night waxed and waned. By daybreak the chanting had ceased altogether. There was no sign of the canoes upon the sea. The sunburst marched across the swinging waters. Far off, an albatross caught the light of gold on its wings. Was it Kivi? Mafatu could not tell. The wind held fresh and fair. The island had vanished over the curve of the sea, and the eaters of men had vanished with it. But now the great ocean current that had carried Mafatu so willingly away from Hikaru was dead set against him. He put his little craft first on one tack, then on another. In the long hours that passed, it seemed as if he was making no headway at all, even though the canoe still cut smartly through the water. There was a drift and a pull that appeared to make forward gain impossible. Was it Moana, trying to prevent Mafatu from returning home? Perhaps, the boy thought wearily, Maui is not yet ready for me to return. Is there still a shadow of fear in my heart? Is that it? He was tired now in every nerve, tired in the marrow of his bones, tired of struggle. The long hours passed slowly while the sun climbed. Mafatu lashed the steering paddle and slept fitfully. Uri lay in the shadow of the sail. The sun sank like the death of a world. Night came and fled. Dawn rose in a burst of flame, and still Mafatu's canoe skimmed across the sea, now on this tack, now on that. He was to learn that in the hours to come, that all days, all time, would be like that. Hours of blasting heat, of shattering sunlight, nights of fitful respite and uneasy sleep. Only the sea and the sky, the sea and the sky, a bird now and then, a fish leaping like from the sea, and a boy in a little canoe. That was all. As one day dragged into another, Mafatu scanned the heavens for some sign of rain, storm, anything would have an unwelcome relief from the blasting monotony. To this limitless circle of sea, his store of poi vanished, the coconuts likewise. His water was being guarded, drop by drop. There would become a moment when one last drop must be taken. And then the sea of storm was long past. The days as they came were cloudless and untroubled. Each day broke like a clap of thunder, and night fell softly. The sea was sparkling and benign. The sun rays were unbroken in their violence. At night the fishhook of Maui twinkled down like friendly eyes, luring Mafatu on, and torch fishes darted up from the lower depths like the black waters gleamed with strange lights. Gradually, as the canoe entered some other current of the sea, the wind slackened and diminished. This wind that had blown him for so long. Now the sail began to hang in the dead air. The canoe drifted on, a slow, majestic tide. The ceaseless heave and surge of the sea lulled the boy to half sleeping. The murmur of the waters playing about the prow sounded like his mother's reassuring voice. Each sun as it rose seemed hotter than the day before. Now the face of the ocean was a disk of blazing copper. Masses of seaweed, heavy with the eggs of fishes, floated on the tide, seeming to clutch at the canoe, to hold it back from its destination. Hikaru, cloud of islands, did they really exist? Were they not, like the chambered Nautilus, only an iridescent stream by the sea? Sharks appeared, as they always did about a craft becalmed. One dorsal fin, larger than the others, followed the canoe in a leisurely parallel, just far enough so Mafatu could not see the body that supported it. But he knew from the size of the dorsal that it must be a tiger shark. It began at length to play upon his nerves. It set him jumpy. He scarcely dared now at night to lash his staring paddle and sleep. The sail slatted and banged. The boy paddled through the long hours, paddled until the muscles of his arms and shoulders ached and every sinew cried in protest. And at night, when darkness brought blessed release from the sun, there was always the fishhook of Maui leading him on. But now when the boy looked up at the ancient constellation, doubt lay heavy on his heart. Hikaru, where was it? Where was it? The sea gave back no answer. Maui, the boy whispered, have you deserted me? Have you looked into my heart and found me wanting? Then suddenly, like the snapping of a string, he was overwhelmed with despair. Maui had deserted him. It was Moana, the sea god's turn. The sea looked dark and cool and inviting. Little wavelets lapped and chuckled about the hull with beckoning hands. He looked overside. Deep down in those cool depths, it seemed to him that he could see faces, his mother's perhaps. He dashed his hand across his eyes. Had the sun made him crazy? Had he been touched by moon madness? Then a wave of anger brought him to his knees. Anger at the sea, which would destroy him if it could. His voice was thick and hoarse, his throat bursting with rage. Moana, you sea god, he shouted. You killed my mother. And now you are trying to destroy me. Fear of you has haunted my sleep. Fear of you turned my people against me. But now, his hands gripped his throat to stop its burning. Now I no longer fear you. His voice rose to a wild note. He sprang to his feet, flung back his head, spread wide his arms in defiance. Do you hear me, Moana? I'm not afraid of you. Destroy me, but I still laugh at you. I laugh at you. His voice, cracked but triumphant, shattered the dead air. He sank back on his haunches, shaking with spasms of laughter. It racked his body, left him spent and gasping on the floor of the canoe. Uri was whimpering softly, and he crept to his master's side. Off to the northeast, a haze of light glowed from the sea. Sometimes the lagoon of Atoll throws up just such a glow. It is the reflection of the lagoon above the lower sky. Lifting his head, the boy watched it with dulled eyes, uncomprehending at first. Te Moro, he whispered at last, his voice a thread of awe. The lagoon fire. There came a whir and fury in the sky above, a beat of mighty wings. His albatross, edged with light, circled above the canoe. It swooped low, its gentle questing eyes turned upon the boy and his dog. Then the bird lifted in its effortless flight, flew straight ahead, and vanished into the lagoon. And then Mafatu knew. Hikiru, his home, was right ahead, and Kivi was here. A strangled cry broke from the boy. He shut his eyes tight, and there was a taste of salt wet upon his lips. The crowd assembled upon the beach watched the small canoe slip through the reef passage. It was a fine canoe, artfully built. The people thought at first that it was empty. Silence gripped them, and a chill of awe touched them with a cold hand. Then they saw a head lift above the gunwale. A thin body struggled to sit upright, clinging to the mid-thwart. "Ah, Te'o!" The cry went up from the people in a vast sigh, so they might speak if the sea should give up its dead. But the boy who dropped overside into the shallows and staggered at the beach was flesh and blood, even though he was thin. They saw that a necklace of boar's teeth shone upon his chest, and a splendid spear flashed in his hand. Tavani Nui, the great chief of Hikuru, went forward to greet the stranger. The brave young figure halted, drew itself upright. "My father," Mafatu cried thickly, "I have come home." The great chief's face was transformed with joy. This brave figure, so thin and straight, with the fine necklace and the flashing spear, and courage blazing from his eyes, was his son? The man could only stand and stare, as if he did not believe it. Then a small yellow dog pulled himself over the canoe, fell at his master's feet. Uri, and overhead an albatross caught the light of on its wings. Then Tavani Nui turned to his people and cried, "Here is my son, come home from the sea, Mafatu, stout heart, a brave name for a brave boy." Mafatu swayed as he stood. "My father," Tavani Nui caught his son as he fell. It happened many years ago, before the missionaries first came into the South Seas, while the Polynesians were still great in number and fierce of heart. But even today, the people of Hikuru sing this story in their chants, and they tell it over the evening fires. What a marvelous story.